Good morning, or late morning. Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We'll just do some quick introductions to let you know who's here with us, and then we'll jump right in. So we are here representing the Harvard Debate Council, which is one of the student organizations at the college. My name is Tripp Rebrovick. I'm the coach of debate and the director of the Debate Council, and we have two of our other coaches here, Jazmine Pickens right here, and LaTonya Starks. And we also have two of our undergraduates joining us today who will be doing a short demonstration for a debate for us. So it'll be a little more exciting than just us talking at you. But as part of the conference, our motivation is to present and describe how you could use debate as an activity, as a classroom exercise, but also a little bit to thinking about debate as a pedagogical tool and how it can be used in educational settings writ large. So we want to bring, and so while it's not quite the formal competitive debates that we use and that we take our students to, we think the skills that they develop are applicable elsewhere. So just a quick overview of how we're going to proceed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we think debate couldn't be a good exercise in the classroom. LaTonya is going to talk about how to set up a classroom debate, things to think about in terms of topic selection, format, etc. And then we're going to switch the order a little bit. We're going to do the demonstration debate with Michi and Dora, and Jazmine is going to walk you through the debate and talk about how to moderate, how to evaluate, and how to run the exercise in a classroom. And then we'll have time, hopefully, we should have plenty of time for Q&A, both for the debaters, if you have questions about how they prepared and how they proceeded, or also for us as instructors as well. So I just wanted to start, I was thinking about how to situate what makes debate a distinct form of argument or a distinct pedagogical tool. And so I don't think this is a perfect Venn diagram. Like I don't know that it's quite as even as this suggests. But I wanted to start out with a distinction about what makes debate as a exercise different from a discussion and a disagreement. Both have multiple parties, of course, but I think to some extent there might be different goals. Whereas I think all of these formats have as their goal some form of truth seeking or trying to produce the best answer to a question, the best solution. But I would say maybe what distinguishes disagreement and debate from discussion is that we have probably clearly articulated sides or points of view. Maybe in a discussion, there's just multiple different perspectives. And then what would make debate distinct from disagreement in my mind, would be the competitive aspect of it that gets introduced and the notion that there's probably going to be a winner at the end of the day. And so I think, as all of you know, we've been talking about civic disagreement and dialogue everywhere at the university for the past several years. And how formal debate fits into that is something we've been thinking a lot about on our team, because I don't think exactly what we train our students to do in competitive debate tournaments is exactly the kind of civic dialogue that would necessarily, I think that, the university and our society at large understands that we need more of, but there's a lot of overlap, and some of the skills that debate harnesses are able to cultivate the kind of civic disagreement that I think people are looking for. So debate it takes disagreement, it takes the distinct sides of a disagreement, but introduces the element of competition, which in my experience and others as well, is sometimes that little kick and incentive that makes it an appealing exercise and something that's engaging for the students. And so when I think about what a debate exercise, how it adds value to a classroom and engages students in particular ways, this is where I start. I think first and foremost, the first two notions are probably pretty easy. Debate requires students to engage in structured and organized communication. They want to present a persuasive case. If the judges are their peers, their professor or something, they have a goal in mind and they need to present their points in a structured fashion. It also teaches them critical and strategic thinking. This is hopefully what they're learning in the classes as well, but it enables the timing is a little bit different, right? When you normally prepare for your papers or for seminar discussions, hopefully you're preparing over the course of a week, but in a debate you only have a few minutes to make a decision. What is the best argument? What is most persuasive? What should I do here? Another piece is, I think, active listening. Because this is interesting because I think there's two problems that this may address. One is how to maintain everybody's attention. I think we're all used to everybody looking at the computer screen. And so debating, in my opinion, sometimes provides a reason to listen to your peers and not to be staring at the computer. But it also helps them. It also gives. Well, yeah. I think it just provides an incentive to do that. The fourth piece that debate can introduce is it provides students with a reason to adopt an opposing perspective, something that is hard to do. Nobody wants to do that by instinct. But debate provides, in some sense, a cover for that. It enables students to take up a different perspective without having to say, oh, I am now fully agreeing with this idea. And so it provides a way to create discussions where there may be some hesitancy or where students may, well, we all agree there's nothing left to talk about, and forcing students to take different sides, but doing it in the context of a simulation or a game or a competition can often produce results. And so the last thing is what I have here and what I've mentioned before is the competitive motivation. At least for the students who gravitate towards the activity, we often say that debaters are mostly athletes who got hurt and they can't play a sport, but they still want to win something. And so they go, oh, I'll try this debate thing. And then hopefully enough of them stick around to do it. And so it's a way to harness what a lot of students really enjoy about competitive sports and also intellectual and scholarly endeavors. And I think it's one of the few places that combines those two. And so it can be an exercise, as I said, that keeps students engaged in material that they may otherwise find not exciting. For me, the value of debate in a classroom, well, of course, you can have a set of readings. Here's what somebody says, here what somebody else says, and now the students are supposed to pick up a side. I think that's a classic vision of how debate can work or how a debate exercise can be implemented. But for me, the other way in which debate is valuable is it provides a way for students to improve their own projects, their own papers, and their own ideas by following a particular process. And to me, I think of this as sort of the power of rebuttal. And in my mind, by responding to objections that are formal and delineated and coming up with responses to those objections, most of the time, all of us will then come up with a better way to make the original presentation. And the act of forcing yourself to produce 2 to 3 clear objections or have a friend do it, respond to those objections one by one, and then after you do that, what usually happens and somebody says, oh, well, actually, my response to their third point, that's where I should begin my speech, or that's my most important innovation. Often if a student is struggling to identify what are the stakes of my project, what am I actually trying to do here, by responding to clearly delineated objections, sometimes you get that epiphany moment. And so for me, there's debate as this, two sides exercise, but there's this process that we can have students engage in that will actually help them, better articulate what it is that they're trying to accomplish. No matter what the particular format is, if you proceed like this, build a speech, articulate objections, either come up with them on your own or have a peer do it, and then reformulate the initial position. And then I guess the 3 main skills that I would hope students would take away from a debate exercise is learning that in formulating their arguments, there's 3 things for them to focus on. Choosing, you have to pick what is your best point. You have only 1 minute or however long it is to make your point, and you can't say everything, so you have to make a choice. We want to instill the idea of clash, that when there's a debate, the points are actually responsive to each other. It's not like a presidential debate, which we would even call debate, and we'll have a demonstration of that. And then the last piece, my colleagues will talk about a little bit more, but we teach our debaters, or we have the students engage in a particular form of note-taking that we call flowing, and the idea is to help line up arguments on a page so you see, rather than just taking notes all the way down through, we teach students to write. A column represents a speech, and a row represents a particular argument. And this method was actually invented by Lawrence Tripp, the law professor in the 60s, and it's changed a little bit. But the idea is that it helps you organize who gave the speech and which arguments respond to which arguments. And also, if nothing is written here, it means nobody responded to this argument or something like that. And so there's a way to take notes in a debate that teaches students to have the arguments line up and make sure everything is responsive, as opposed to just, here's all my points, and here's all my other points from that. And I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, LaTonya.
Hello. All right. So for the next part of the presentation, I will be debating the entire room myself. So in this section, what we're going to cover are how to establish ground rules in your classrooms for debates. And one of the ways that I thought it might be constructive for us to discuss it is to employ the constructive controversy technique as a method of doing so. Then we'll talk about how to structure a debate. What are the steps? What are I'll give you a couple sample structures so y'all can take pictures of those slides just to have something to go home with, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to write a debate speech, but that will become a lot more clear to you once you actually see some debate speeches happening. Okay, so to establish ground rules for a constructive debate environment is obviously going to be very particular to you and how you teach, but also to the students that you are teaching. But in general, just kind of the ground rules that we lay out for everyone are the same ground rules that we would lay out for how we would like our classrooms to ideally operate in general. Practice respect for the opinions of others, especially when you do not agree with them. I think that, rancor amongst students during any type of debate is going to happen just because of the very nature of debate, but you can do so in a respectful way. The next is no ad hominem attacks. I say that because I've experienced lots of people, doing it in debate rounds. I can only imagine that it can happen in your classrooms as well, especially depending on the age of the people that you teach. With younger people, and I say that even meaning like people that are college age, it is a lot of the time easier to just go after someone personally than it is to actually listen to what they have to say and think of a thoughtful response. The next is listen carefully to your opponent's arguments and do not interrupt them. We can be so eager to get our side of the story across that we often just disregard that someone has the floor. And that's obviously not how we want to proceed. Manage your emotions. That's something I want to tell everyone I meet on a daily basis. But in this particular context, it means do not let your feelings get the better of you. Do not rise to anger, because a lot of times it is a strategy in debate, in academia, and the type of debate that we do, to say things that are well within the rounds of discussion, but that are going to nitpick at your opponent to rile them up, because when we're angry, we're not making our best decisions. And so don't rise to that. Emphasizing that, that is a tactic, lets people be able to realize how to deal with that a lot better. Next is learn to be comfortable defending any position, even the ones that you do not agree with. In policy debate, we are tasked with discussing both sides of the topic for the entirety of the year. So we have to be pro, we have to be con several times in the same tournament, in the same day, which means that we don't always agree with the words that we say. You don't always have to agree with an argument, but it might be the best argument to make in order to get your opinion across. And finally, remind your students that the ability to debate is a life skill. As Tripp was saying, it equips us to be good citizens who can advocate for ourselves and others, as well as to defend issues we care about while still being able to see the other side's argument, which is so important, especially in today's world. Next is using the constructive controversy technique as a guide for establishing a productive debate environment. So disagreement can be constructive in many ways. And in these debate rounds and in the debates in your classes, it will be. You can make better decisions based on good reasons or warrants by considering the perspectives and views of others instead of simply rejecting them out of hand. So if you come up with a thesis that you think is the best thing since sliced bread, and your opponent makes an argument that makes complete logical sense, but maybe you just didn't think about it, that gives you the opportunity not to double down on something that may not work, but to go back and do more research and make changes so that you are producing an argument that, takes the other team's argument or opponent's argument into account while also bolstering your initial claim. So constructive controversy is just a practical pedagogical technique that helps you to do this in a way of testing proposed solutions to prove, disprove, and improve them. Constructive controversy is a technique which was introduced in 1979 by David Johnson and Roger Johnson for assessing different arguments in a structured way to achieve a positive outcome. It involves deliberative discussions aimed at creative problem solving. And while it can be contrasted to debate due to debate's competitive nature, there are ways of using the technique to inform the way that classroom debates are conducted. I thought that the easiest way to kind of describe how this technique could be used is to just break down the 5 actions, they're called actions and reactions, of constructive controversy. So the constructive controversy technique builds on 5 actions and reactions that we commonly experience during problem solving and decision making, be it, what brand of bread to buy or how to change economic policy for the United States. The first step is to adopt an initial perspective based on your personal experiences and perceptions, or hopefully research in the case of your students. Second is to try to persuade others to agree with you, strengthening your belief that you are right. Third is to know that you will be confronted with competing viewpoints. And 4, may begin to doubt your original rationale for why you decided to do something, so that 5, you look for more information until you feel certain enough to draw a conclusion, even if that conclusion is completely different than what your original position was. With constructive controversy technique, it's a technique that is supposed to be based around 2 people who ultimately agree on the same thing but disagree on how to achieve that goal. And for the purposes of classroom debates, that goal is that we have a good debate and discuss the issues, so that maybe if you're working on brainstorming topics for a paper after having a debate about what your particular topic might be, you might encounter these steps, get some better information, go back to the drawing board and revise what it is you were supposed to be doing in the first place. Okay, so how to structure a debate. First, we'll discuss the structure of a debate, and then we will discuss ways to structure a debate that includes a couple of sample formats. The steps of a classroom debate are kind of structured and organized in a way that allows both sides to have equal time to speak. The shortened version of this that I could put in a PowerPoint that makes the most sense is the affirmative or the pro side speaks and states their claim with all their supporting details, which we in policy debate call a constructive speech. Then the negative or the con side would state their claim and supporting details in another constructive speech. Then there would be a negative rebuttal and closing argument, a rebuttal speech. And sometimes rebuttals and closing statements are are separate speeches. It just depends on what you want your format to look like. And then the affirmative side will state their rebuttal and closing arguments in their rebuttal speech. So it's just back and forth, back and forth. Okay, sample debate structure number 1. The first argument speaker would introduce the topic and state their first argument or their group of arguments. I think that for these types of debates, having anywhere from 2 to 5 arguments might work. 2 or 3 would probably be better given the time constraints. That's about 3 minutes. Then you get the counter argument for 3 minutes. The first speaker again comes back and they say their second argument for 3 minutes. Then we get a 3-minute counter argument. Then there's a 5 to 10 minute break that's like a universal time. We call it preparation time for both sides to look at their flows, reconsider their arguments, figure out what the best things to say in the rebuttals are. Then we have the counter argument speaker will state their rebuttal and summarize their position for 2 minutes. And finally, the original first argument speaker or the pro speaker would give their 2-minute rebuttal. Another example of how you could do this. There can be an introduction to the topic, and the debater themselves can do this introduction and introduce themselves to the class for 3 minutes. Then the arguments happen, 3 minutes per side. Keeping in mind that arguments include a claim, warrant, and data to support your point. A claim is when a student would state what their position is. The warrant is how, like the why or how or because something happens. And then the data is the actual evidence that backs up the claim. You would have the students repeat this claim, warrant, data cycle as you see fit, but I recommend 2 or 3 claims consisting of an opening statement and presentation of arguments. Then you would prepare for rebuttals with 5 minutes of preparation time combined for both sides. The rebuttal speeches are each 3 minutes long. I almost said 10, and then you all would have hated me. And then we get to how to write a debate speech. This varies for everyone, but you simply want to think about it like writing a paper. Your introduction, supporting idea, your rebuttal, and your conclusion. Yeah, in the conclusion, you would just restate your topic while pointing out the deadly flaw on the other side's argument and remembering your audience is paying attention and being sure to be persuasive and make eye contact. Jazmine? Oh, right. So now you all are going to see a couple of our wonderful Harvard students do a sample demonstration debate for you, and Jazmine will come up afterwards to discuss what it's like to moderate this type of debate.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Michi Sin. I'm a first year on the Harvard Debate Council. We just got this merch recently, so it's very helpful in introducing myself. Just for some context, this debate is going to be about the best tool to adapt with increasing automation and AI in the workforce. Okay, cool. Anybody not ready?
I need to introduce myself.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That was rude.
No, you're good. So I'm Dora. I'm also first year on the Harvard Debate Council. And as Michi said, we are going to be discussing the ways that, like, since, you know, the format we're used to is policy debate, we're going to be introducing potential policies that can be used to address the current issues with automation and AI taking away jobs. Specifically, we're going to be discussing something called a universal basic income. Some of you guys may know this from Andrew Yang's campaign back in 2020, where he mentioned universal basic income. So the way this debate is going to be set up is that Michi is going to be for a universal basic income and I will be against.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody not ready? Cool. Great. In an increasingly changing workforce, the choice is clear: evolve or perish. And the best way to evolve is by adopting a universal basic income, a periodic, unconditional payment from the government that is given to people in the form of cash. First, a universal basic income alleviates poverty by providing people a financial safety net if they are in between jobs and experiencing job loss due to automation. In fact, across over 4 decades and 160 case studies, universal basic income has been linked to decreasing poverty and increasing health and education outcomes across 3 different continents. Second, a universal basic income would alleviate inequality. Though it cannot address all aspects of income inequality, what it does do is it raises the wage floor, which not only provides people below the poverty line an opportunity to pay for basic needs, but also allows them to do more long-term investments into the economy and into individual ventures like small businesses. Thank you.
So I will first forefront that I am not going to be negating any social benefits of universal basic income. I think that basic incomes can be good and cash payments can be good for providing basic needs, etc. But I will argue that the federal adoption of a universal basic income is only a short-term solution to all the problems that we are seeing currently, such as poverty, the job losses, etc. I think that a universal basic income is simply like a Band-Aid over the bullet hole. It is just a temporary solution. We have given like the context of AI or automation or job losses. These are real things that providing a cash payment or a basic income is not going to be able to solve. In the short term, it may be good to provide some sort of relief, but in the long term, if the government does not turn towards longer term strategies that increase job growth, that increase the amount of jobs available, that can create new industries, a basic income is only going to be something that is like a distraction from focusing on larger solutions.
While my opponent mentions that universal basic income is a Band-Aid over a bullet hole, we would argue that it actually takes away the gun. Not only that, but short-term benefits and long-term benefits are not mutually exclusive. Short-term things like stimulus can actually give way to more long-term benefits. When somebody below the poverty line isn't worried about paying for groceries or healthcare, they have more time to invest back into the economy or even do independent ventures like small businesses, which historically employ 66% of the American workforce. Not only that, but universal basic income is periodic. The stimulus checks back in COVID, even though they were just one time, were able to power the economy to a more resilient recovery, which is why UBI is one of the best solutions to a changing workforce.
Yeah, so Michi mentioned how having a universal basic income is good to pay for necessities, but I will argue that a basic income alone is not enough to sort of combat the reasons why these necessities are so expensive in the first place. I will also argue that applying a universal basic income, if it is applied to everyone equally, everyone gets the same amount, it will essentially have inflationary effects, which means that we are going to be in a doom loop where universal basic income payments will continuously rise while the prices of our necessities rise, which means that, it might help for the first few months, but by the end of the year, the need for necessities, the inability to pay for necessities, that will still persist absent some sort of strategy. And I will also bring up an additional point that this is simply not fiscally feasible to provide cash payments continuously for as long as you need it. But I think in the context of this debate, like just a continuous universal basic income that will be incredibly expensive given the number of Americans that are in the United States. So I think that because it is fiscally infeasible and also long term just not a good strategy, we should look towards other alternative methods.
My opponent brings up many valid concerns about the implementation of universal basic income, but we need to look at things in their broader context. There are many mechanisms that make universal basic income feasible that also address their concerns about inflation and inequality. First, a universal basic income could be carried out through things like progressive taxation on the wealthy, which not only limits inequality, but also makes the plan more feasible going forward. Another solution that has been proposed by experts is a robot tax, essentially a tax on companies that increase automation, and that helps pay for universal basic income in the long term. While my opponents are right that Americans need a long-term solution, those solutions are built back into universal basic income.
So Michi brought up points about how we could fund a universal basic income to make it fiscally feasible, but I will argue that these methods of progressive taxation, one, is simply not feasible in our current political current political situation. It's just not going to happen. Second, she proposed an idea of having a robot tax. We think that this is going to inhibit the industry's growth. Yes, we think that we think that technology growth, AI growth, that is generally a good thing for the United States to forefront. However, if we are going to be taxing these industries, we think that that can actually inhibit the growth. So we think that having these sort of ways that inhibit the industries, inhibit growth, in order to pay for universal basic income will exacerbate both industry issues as well as not solving the core issue of job losses. We think that we should focus on other sort of solutions. Thank you.
I mean, really, what can I say after that? But I feel like the reason why I put the image here is because as adjudicators of these debates, as we can hear these very eloquent ladies giving their points, engaging with the different counter arguments, what do I do? Right? Like, they've executed at the highest level. They are provided good kind of comparison. And so a beautiful mind with the, numbers and equations dancing through the brain, he can figure it out. Me, I'm like, oh, we'll have to figure it out as a judge, is often how we feel after dealing with all this information that's been put in front of us. So how do we moderate, evaluate debates and the different ideas? I tag this as tabulating a comparative analysis, because something that debaters are both great and tragically great at is being right. So if you ever have kids or you've dealt with your students, the kind of argumentativeness and combativeness of, I'm right. I can tell you and explain to you all the different reasons why I'm right. Maybe the goal is not always being right, but being strategic in your concessions, strategic in your comparisons, and how do you as a judge evaluate this, not from a question of who won this debate in their correctness, but who was strategic enough in the way that they weighed and evaluated the arguments in the debate. So it's a hard task. Been doing it for 15 years now, and it still does not get easier, which is a great thing because it means that debate is still very beneficial and educational in all of its facets. So, post the setup. So, Tripp and LT did a wonderful job in describing kind of the overall schematic of debate. I'm not really going to over-explain that to you all because you got that. But some things that I think for moderation is one that as adjudicators, judges, that we believe, hopefully, is that we're tabula rasa. I don't know if that's a phrase that you all have utilized, but, all things go. I have no biases. Anything that you present to me in front of, this debate stage, I will evaluate at face value and have no prior conceptions or leanings, etc. Lies. And debaters early on learn that as a lie because we have things such as judge paradigms that tell the students, hey, here's my background, here's how I have been trained, here's what language means to me. And so when you engage in this activity, there are certain kind of prior notions of how this game works that are going to inform the way that I make these decisions. Debaters have to look at that and go, what does it feel like to hear a judge say everything that I do is the opposite of the way that they think? And I have to debate in front of them in 10 minutes. Great, let's figure this out. Let's, curate our arguments to, fit in the way that they communicate, which is a harder task than just, here are our arguments, but how can I communicate our arguments in a way that will be synthesized to you as strategic? So there is no Tyler Rasa judge. I wish that was the case. I have not found them. But it does beg the question of, what is the responsibility of both the adjudicator and the student to work together in this kind of interest convergence of biases and prior trainings and prior understandings of how, words and what they mean and what our participation in this activity look like to come to the decision of who wins the debate? Yeah. The other part is that it's an active and adaptive learning process. I wouldn't have been here in this activity for 15 years. Tripp, 20, LaTonya, 25. I don't want to give out too much information on numbers. But we wouldn't be here as long as we have if it wasn't, a constantly evolving, adaptive, almost annoying, bugging sense
in our kind of both professional journey but educational journey of how do I get them to listen? How do I get them to understand? And how do I change the same thing that I just said, 2 + 2 = 4, but the way that I said 2 + 2 = 4 can be different in this particular context, and to continually move the debates. And I think there's a conception that debate is purely quantitative, i.e. that you advance 3 arguments. If you win those 3 arguments because your opponent drops those 3 arguments or doesn't answer one of the arguments, you win. I wish that was definitely not the case when I was a debater. I was like, hey, I advanced the 3 arguments. How did I still lose? Well, because of things like comparative analysis, weighing, and things that we look for as adjudicators in the debate. Next is a moderation checklist. So procedural norms. Here it says here that students abide by predetermined and preset norms of debate, such as speech times. LaTonya went over some examples of speech times with constructive speeches. In policy debates, there are 2-hour-long engagements of words going back and forth, going auctioneer fast. Not every format is like that, but ours is the more, ridiculous. But there are norms in terms of speech times format of the debate that students go into learning the format and said, okay, this is what the speech looks like. This is how it ought to be presented, performed, etc. And the judge will decide a winner. The judge cannot say you both win. Why did I come to the tournament? If you were going to tell me that we both win, I want to win, me, singular, personal, with my partner. Great. And then students expect a norm of fairness. We just talked about how tabula rasa, not a thing, but when we work together as the judge and the students with having these differences, how can we come to some type of agreement for the way that we evaluate and weigh arguments? Is there a fairness that can be objectively kind of coded into the evaluation process that goes, okay, you understand what my paradigm is, you did your best to kind of fit into that, or you exposed it and gave arguments and reasons that the other side did not engage with or decide or counter. So even though it exists outside of my paradigm, you've made arguments. They've not been responded to. I can clearly see that. I vote for you. So there's an objective kind of fairness that is kind of presumed by students. Quantitative and qualitative. One is that for qualitative, the reframing of the debate from a telos of yes, no, to it is debatable. Because UBI, good, bad. From this debate, how many of you all could decide who won just from like the UBI, yes, UBI, no? The room would be split. What did we achieve, right? Did we win that it is a good, preferable strategy, policy, etc.? Who knows? And we reframe it to debatable. How can I make strategic concessions? How can I say, what can I lose? And debaters are really good at looking at the flow that Tripp went over and asking the question of, what can I lose? What is necessary to win? And how do I kind of reframe that strategically to get the judge to receive that information? It is a constantly evolving practice because every debate can have the same topic, which often it does. In our world of debate, we have the same topic all year long. This year deals with labor laws and unionization, which is very timely. But every single debate is different because every single debater engages in the question of what becomes debatable per round, even if it was the same content. And I think that's what keeps the activity very kind of adaptive and generative because both the adjudicators, us in the back, as well as the students, have to kind of engage in this ongoing dialogue of how do we communicate. And I think that's one of the most beneficial portions of debate is that it's not enough just to say 2 + 2 = 4. Great, let me close my computer. No, it's how can I relay that in a way that means something to the judge given their preset determinations and mine to advance my point. So yeah, I think that's kind of how we're going to end that. Thank you.
I guess just a couple quick closing thoughts from my end about everything, and then we happy to take questions about how you might use a debate exercise in your area of expertise or how we might frame it and things like that. I'm also curious if anyone has questions for the students and how they prepared and what they did and what advice you would give to people who are not experts and trained in debate and things that you might think about. So the other question I had is sort of how do we, because is our topic about does UBI appropriately address the risks or the problems created by AI isn't maybe not something that your class would be about. And I think that's the one of the tricks with debate is coming up with a topic based on whatever the readings are for the week or whatever the subject of the class is, and creating it in a way that enables there to be quote unquote sides or different perspectives and that are actually equally plausible and equally debatable. And I think that's always the most challenging part. And so we wanted to find an example that was at least a little bit easier to have this. But I mean, I guess, do you all have anything you all want to add about how you think preparing for debates, any tricks that you used to get ready? And then we can open it up for general questions.
Yeah, so like we were discussing earlier how we were preparing for the debate. It was very simple for our end. We were told it was a very informal thing. So for us, it was just a very quick research, just what are the reasons why UBI is bad, what is the reason why it's good. I think when applied to maybe more academic settings, say it's you're doing a set of readings, you could investigate those readings, you could find a source of controversy between different authors, and that is something that you could exploit within a debate and be this author is correct, this author is not correct. Here are my reasons why. But in the context of this debate, it was very simple. Let me see online what the general points are. Let me see if there are any studies that support it. And then let me just jot those down so I have them in my head.
Yep, I would agree with that. I think in broader debates or for debates that you would implement in your class, another really good thing to do is actually looking at reasons why not. When I was researching UBI for this debate, the first couple articles that came up were UBI is a terrible solution. And instead of shying away from those because I knew they didn't support my point, I ended up looking at them. And I think that exploring some of the main reasons for opposition against your argument actually help you refine your argument, even during the prep time process.
That's also, we're happy to take comments or questions.
Hi, I'm Dustin Tingley. I'm the interim vice provost for advances in learning and a former debater. So I guess my, first of all, really thankful for this. And I guess my main question is, why do you guys think that it has been difficult for debate in a formalized sense where there's structure rather to penetrate a lot of classrooms? And the reason I ask this is if you were to sort of take a step back, all the principles you are articulating about why this is valuable are sort of the same things that we hear from our administrators of what we want in the classroom. And so it just makes me reflect, what do you think the structural reasons are for why it is difficult to get debate in some format, but where there is a format, it's just not just broad-ranging discussion into the classroom? Because, I mean, maybe I'm biased, I am biased, that I just think it's such a rich tool, and I personally use it when I can. And furthermore, just a little flag, the whole notion of anticipating the counter arguments to whatever your argument is, that's literally how I teach writing. It's just it came from debate, so it's just suffused with everything I like. And then when I look out at the ecosystem, it's just not there as often as I would think. So, from your perspective, why the lack?
That's a really good question. I think the thing that comes to mind is in some ways I think people think you have to be an expert and you have to have coached debate for many years in order to do it in your classroom. And part of, I kind of want to protect my job and say, no, coaching is very hard. You have to do, but I think lowering the expectation of what sort of, training and expertise in debate an instructor or teacher has to have. I think what we know or what our students learn is expertise in the subject matter is what makes you a good debate coach. And so thinking about your training to run debates in classroom really comes from your subject matter expertise, and the forms are easy. So I think it's that my intuition is that people just think, oh, this is going to be too hard. This is beyond what I know how to do as an instructor. That would be my guess. And then I think students, I think maybe, a lot of people have a fear of public speaking or don't want to do it. And I know I didn't want to debate at first, but my mother made me. She said, you're going to do this. I'm tired of you arguing with me, and now you're going to go argue with these other people. And so I think I didn't want to do it at first, and so I had to be compelled to do it. And then from then it was just oh my God, this is a life-changing thing. So I think for me, there may be some sort of psychological barrier, but At least that's my first guess.
I think a big barrier to debate in the classroom is spectator non-participation. So obviously there's a limit to the number of people that can be actively in a debate. And this could obviously be coming from the biased perspective of a debater who loves to talk. But when I'm watching debates, all I want to do is jump in and be part of it. And so I think an interesting way to incorporate debate into the classroom is increase spectator participation, maybe have a questioning period or have spectators give decisions at the end, and that makes it feel less of like a FOMO situation with debate in the classroom.
Yeah, I will say like increasing spectator participation is a good way. I always love asking questions to people, but I think a big barrier in the classroom is what Tripp mentioned earlier, is like the fear of debate. Like I think whenever we get assigned debates in classroom settings, I'm fine with it. I've been doing it for a few years, not a big deal to me, but my classmates are always like, oh my God, I'm so nervous. And then they spent all night like having pages and pages of like stuff written, they research that, you know, they only have 3 minutes to say and they're not saying everything. But I think that just like the thought of debating, the thought of argumentation, like, oh, I'm going to be proven wrong or people will say I'm wrong, that is like a very big fear that people have in their mind. So I think it's like, it's one thing, it's just like telling students like, it's okay that, you know, you are going to be told you're wrong. It's okay that other people will be arguing against you. That is a very real thing. So it's just getting over that fear. Getting over that fear of debate is, I think, a big reason why, like, debates aren't well received by students. Like, students don't love it, but I think it's like a very, very valuable tool, and it's like a really fun thing to do. Of course, I'm also biased.
Thank you so much. This has been a really great discussion, and as a visiting student at Oxford, the Oxford Union debates were like the highlight of my term there. And this actually came up at one of the discussion roundtables that we had a couple of years ago with the faculty having difficult discussions, I think was the roundtables that we participated in. And the idea of having more debates on campus was an idea that came out of that. And I think that as a faculty member, how do we moderate? How do we encourage debate? And also, like, if emotions do rise, how do we step in as faculty to encourage healthy discussion and debate at, you know, when, again, there may be emotion, there may be a loss of fair discussion in the classroom. So how do we as faculty engage with that and to encourage debate when not everyone has had formal training or experience in debate?
I think that part of the issue is that when people think of debate today, they think of like those YouTube series where there's like a person sitting at a chair waiting for like a round of people to come to their like table and talk, like debate them. And so I think we need to move away, like, you know, tell the students kind of immediately that that is not what this is, because the students have a fear of being canceled, or like a fear of not being accepted any longer in their peer group based on something they may have said like during a debate round, or because they don't agree with a perspective that someone else has said. So if you can kind of have a discussion with the class to let them know, you know, what the expectations are, how this type of debate, this classroom debate is different from what they're used to seeing, and then maybe even make it interactive, where when you are setting the ground rules that you've come up with, you have student discussion about, you know, guidelines that they would also like to see, so that they feel like they're a part of the process and are more likely to want to be a part of it. When it comes to the actual moderation, or if things get out of hand, I think that laying that groundwork helps to prevent those types of situations from happening, but diffuse them as quickly as you possibly can. And then remind everyone that they're in an academic space where it's safe to make academic mistakes and safe to discuss, you know, to have discussions about things that they wouldn't normally have discussions about. But those aren't judgments on you as a person. And so therefore, maybe that can diffuse some of the anger or like resentment that could happen between students because of being on opposing sides of of an argument. Typically, when the students feel like they have a stake in how things go, things tend to go a lot easier for you as the instructor.
Yeah, and one other little, it's almost a trick or a tip, but you say, oh, which side do you agree with beforehand? Make them write it down and fill out a survey, and then okay, you have to, and then so it kind of diffuses the like if someone is really emotionally attached to one of the perspectives, they have to do the other. Now, this doesn't work unless the topic is such that, right, you can't just take like a hot button issue, and expect. But like I think, yeah, but carefully creating the sides and then having students be forced to take the side they didn't expect to take often is a way, I think, to make it.
Well, first of all, thank you so much both for framing and then for demonstrating the debate. Oh, yes. And I'm Alexandra Sidlovskaya from Harvard Business School. So I have two but related questions to learning. I understand a lot of learning happens as you prepare for the debate. And so this question is for the two debaters. Thank you. So anything in the debate itself that surprised you hearing from your opponent? So you say, oh, I haven't thought about that, or I haven't seen that, or I haven't looked at it that way.
Definitely. If we're talking about this round specifically, when Dora brought up how a universal basic income can lead to more inflationary pressure, and it just causes us to constantly raise the basic income while like the prices of goods like groceries get like higher and higher and more out of reach. That was something that I hadn't thought of in my research. And so I really appreciated that she brought it up because I thought it was a really good point against like consistent cash injections into the economy.
And so just a little bit more about that. And so what was your response? Like, oh, that's actually a really good point. Or how do I counter it? What was your thought process?
Yeah, so I kind of realized that the fact that injecting money into the economy consistently will cause inflation is probably a true argument, right? So addressing that on face is something that's going to be a lot more difficult for me. So I tried to address an argument that was behind it. So for example, like inflation is really harmful because it specifically affects people that are impoverished, people that live paycheck to paycheck and below the poverty line, because obviously, Jeff Bezos doesn't care if his groceries get like $5 more expensive. And so something that I did was I tried to reframe the issue to something that I thought universal basic income better addressed in order to try to get at like the root cause of her argument, or like a big reason why it was exacerbated.
Great. Yes, I'd love to hear from you too.
Yeah. I guess like a new thing that was introduced was like sort of like the progressive taxation, or ways that we can pay for universal basic income. I think like Michi like explored a little bit more. I was like, yeah, like those would actually be good strategies. And I think like with very, very simple basic economics, it would kind of offset the effect of inflation because you're increasing taxes. So like that, like I didn't really get to debate that one out particularly much, but I think that like for me, responding to it is just like, it would also hurt the industry. So just like examining like issues with that. Like I will say that like with things like quick thinking and debates, those are skills that are more practice based because we've been in this in a long time. And it's always like, when we hit an argument that we think is really good, we don't immediately panic like I think some students like tend to do. We just like, okay, it can't be that good. There's always an argument against every single argument. And if it is truly like that amazing, like what Michi said earlier about how universal basic income is good for poverty, good for getting your groceries. I was like, I'm not going to say that getting groceries is a bad thing. Like there are things that you have to concede. And it's just like, yeah, I'm not going to debate you on that. But I will say that you can get groceries in the short term, but you can't get them in the long term because of what a basic income does. So I think it's just like strategies to like one, you don't panic, but second, it's just like understanding that in all these arguments, they all have a flaw with them. So then you just have to think a little, take a step back and be like, this wouldn't actually work.
And I think both of you are getting this idea of how do you listen with an open mind, because I think it came up several times, this idea of just wanting to be right, which can actually maybe do the opposite of what we want to be doing. And where we're actually listening with an open mind saying, oh yes, actually, that's a really good point. And that's my, I think, broader question around learning, because learning to me, a lot of time is this freedom to change your mind, maybe multiple times. And I would love to hear more of how you are both setting up the debate. Was amazing to flesh out all those different issues, right? And it actually is someone who was listening without the stakes in the ground. I felt I've learned a lot because I was so open, and I actually was able to change my mind several times. I was listening to this, but as people are debating, I'm curious, how do you still keep an open mind where you're actually learning and feel the freedom to change your mind?
I think in this debate, it's the format we do, there's always a back and forth. We always switch sides. So I feel like there's no there's never really been a very, very strong time to me for a particular argument. But I also feel like debate as really just a site of learning, just because you learn so much in terms of the research process, and you get to hear all these different arguments that people make. So I think that a way that can boost the learning process is emphasizing, you're not debating to win. You're not debating to win. You're debating because one, very good research process. Second, good for public speaking. And third, it teaches you the other side. But also, I think a good thing, a good reflection thing after a debate is just what do you think the other side said that was really convincing? So that I think that is a very good reflective moment that can help students learn from the debate. But I think the biggest thing is emphasizing in a classroom setting, you're not debating to win, you're debating to learn, and you're debating to practice.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Dora said. One thing that I'll add is another part about keeping an open mind is thinking about the debate and reflecting on it afterward. So especially at tournaments, we will do things reformatting a piece of evidence that we are reading, or adding in a new response in our case, or adding in some more nuance to our arguments, such that between round 1 and round 6 of a tournament, you are looking at a crazy upward improvement, because we are able to acknowledge that some opponents' responses are really good and objectively true, and incorporate either things to say back or more nuance in our case that allows our ideas to be refined and eventually improved later.